Hey sweet friends, welcome to a new tutorial video. Today we're going to talk about the barn I designed in this barnyard themed set. I have already talked about the apple that I created for this set in a previous video. I will link it down in the description box below, and other tutorial videos will come on this page as well. So just keep on the lookout if you're looking for a specific design to see how I created it. Just keep watching and those videos will hit over the next few weeks. If you have any questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to ask below. But without further ado, let's get going. Welcome to Rock City Cookies, where we talk about all things cookies. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video. Thanks for watching. Now, this barn cookie cutter is in our Etsy shop. I feel like I'm a broken record when I say that. In fact, this entire barnyard themed set, with the exception of one cookie cutter, is in our Etsy shop. I will have all of them linked down in the description box below, but I do love this cute little barn and it can be used in a lot of ways. I have seen pink barns, I have seen green barns, I have seen yellow barns. So depending on what your theme is that you are doing, you are more than welcome, in the color scheme of the party, you're more than welcome to change up your barn color. It does not have to be red. But for this set, they were using the traditional red barn coloring in their decorations. And so that is what I went for when decorating this barn. To start off, when decorating this cookie, I knew I wanted the windows to be flush. I didn't want a flooded window. I kind of wanted the windows to go into the background. And that really helps with layering. So if you look at a cookie design and you think, what can go back, what can go forward, kind of have that three-dimensional look in a cookie form, I always try to really think about that when I'm decorating a cookie. So I wanted the windows to look like they were in the background. In order to achieve that, I wanted to just use an edible paintbrush. The paintbrush itself is not edible. The paintbrush is only used for edible goods. I should say that. I kind of tend to say edible paintbrush, and I don't mean the paintbrush itself is edible. I mean that I only use that paintbrush for my cookies. And so I will use my black. I'm wanting the windows to be black. And so I'm going to use thick black icing, and I'm just going to use kind of like a little scribble where I want the windows to be. And I did project my barn onto my cookies so that I knew cohesive wise where all of those windows should be. But you can do this without a projector. You can just look at the picture of the cookie cutter that's listed on our Etsy page. And so you can just kind of look and eyeball where windows might go. And then with the paintbrush, with the black icing, you're just going to brush down that black icing so it's nice and flush on your cookie. And that doesn't really matter what it looks like. Just make sure you cover enough area of the cookie that your window will be completely black. After you've done that, well, then I'm going to outline the rest of the cookie so I know where things need to go. And so I'm going to outline the grain silo next, and I'm going to flood that section. And the reason why I chose to do that section first before I did the other sections was because the grain silo touches both the top of the grain silo and the barn itself. So by flooding that section first, that means that I can come back later and I can flood the top part of the grain silo and the barn at the same time, and they can all dry at that time. So instead of having to pick up the cookie more times by either flooding the top part of the barn and the barn itself, the top part of the silo and the barn itself, and then coming back and flooding the grain silo, I knew that if I flooded the grain silo first, that wouldn't take near as long to dry. So then I could come back and flood the rest of the cookie. But you do want to do those at separate times so that you get that dimension, that definition that really helps to set your cookies apart. If you flood it all at once and all your icing blends together, well, then it just looks kind of like a blob. It doesn't really look like the real thing that you're trying to portray. So after the grain silo has dried, I'm going to outline the windows first so that I know where I don't want my flood icing to go. I want to keep that black window, and I'm going to outline the rest of the cookie so that I'm able to keep my flood onto my cookie. I get asked occasionally, why do you outline before you flood? And the whole reason why you do that is because if you don't have an edge for your icing to go to, you're more likely for your icing to spill over the edge. So I do see people that never outline their cookies and they just flood them, but what they do is they keep that flood pretty far away from the edge of their cookie so that if it does continue to move, if that flood does continue to edge closer to the edge of the cookie, that they're not in risk of the flood going over the edge. But I would say a good 99% of cookiers outline their cookies to keep their flood in place, to keep that icing on their cookie, because nothing is quite as frustrating as flooding a cookie and then coming back later and seeing your icing spilling over the edge onto your pan as it's drying. It's really sad. It's very devastating. So that's why you outline and then flood. And yes, I outline and then I flood my cookie right away. I don't wait for my outline to dry. I just flood it right away. That icing is thick, so it still keeps your flood, your thinner icing, it still keeps it in place even though it's wet. You do not have to wait for it to dry to do the work that it needs to do. So after I have finished my barn and I've let it dry for several hours under a fan. Now this is very important. You want your icing to dry under a fan for a long time before you do this next part, because if your icing is anywhere wet at all and you go to put an edible marker on top of it, you will puncture through your icing. And there's nothing you can do to fix that other than scraping your cookie and starting over and letting your flood dry all over again. So make sure your icing has been drying under a fan. I have a fan blowing on my cookies non-stop while I'm working on them. I let that cookie dry for several hours before I do any sort of edible marker work. So once I know that my cookie is completely dry, I then pull out my red edible marker. I will link the ones I use down in the description box below. They're pretty cheap. I've had them for a long time. They last for a good long while, and it's a pack of multiple colors, so you're able to use it for all sorts of designs. And I'm going to add some red lines onto my cookie. Now, I could have flooded my barn in sections so that you had that paneled look on your barn. I could have done it over and over and over again, and there was multiple sections, and so I could have had that panel looked without the edible marker. If I would have done my cookies in that way, it would have taken a lot longer to flood my cookies. In addition, I could have potentially had some cratering by doing small areas of paneling like that. And so for me, I just opted to go the easier, faster route. And so that was to flood an entire base barn, the entire base of my barn, just one red flood, and then use an edible marker to kind of get that paneled look. So I didn't use a ruler or anything. I just start in the middle of my barn because I know I'm going to want to line down that middle so that I have symmetry. And then I just work my way out. So I start down the middle, I go towards the outside, and then I do the same thing, but I go on the other side. So I start down the middle and I go down the other side until I have all of my lines drawn onto my cookie. As long as you keep some sort of similar spacing, just by looking with your eyeball, it's all that matters. They're not gonna notice if it's exactly the same spacing or not. Just try to keep as similar as you can. Once you have done the lines, then you can move on to adding some more details to the window and the door on your barn, as well as the roof pitch. So I'm just going to use thick white icing that I have been using all throughout my set. I used it for lettering. I used it for all the detail work. This actual thickness is straight out of my mixer. So if I'm making fresh icing, I will mix it to this sort of consistency, which is just what my recipe calls for. So this icing is a thicker icing, and I'm going to then pipe on to my barn an X that represents the door of the barn. And then I'm going to add a little bit of extra to the windows just to kind of make sure that they look like window ledges. And so I'm going to add just some white on the bottom of the windows. And then I'm going to go up to the pitch of the barn and add that sort of detail both on the grain silo and on the roof. And I'm not projecting this, I'm just eyeballing this. So you're more than welcome to use your projector if you feel like you need the precision to have the exact same details on all of the cookies. But I really felt like this part was something that I could do just with my eye. I didn't have to use a projector, but I did want a little bit of a thicker roof pitch than just what I was using on the windows. And so in order to accomplish that, I'm not going to use a flood icing. I'm just going to go back and forth with my thick icing and just create a few layers. And after I have those layers on there, then I will use my scribe tool and I will come back and I will wiggle my scribe tool and kind of smooth out that entire roof pitch so that it looks more like what you would accomplish with a flood, but without having to use such a thin icing. I did forget to mention that I did use edible marker on top of the grain silo as well, just to give that with some curved lines that time, just to give that appearance of curvature at the top of that grain silo. Now that my roof is completely done, I do wish I would have come down on the left-hand side. I would have come down just a little bit further with my white, just so that it was a little bit more symmetrical. But in the end result, I don't think it really mattered that much. much, and our little barn is done. Stay tuned for more designs in this set to be coming to YouTube soon, as well as other cookie designs from other sets, and I will see you soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.